In this video, we're diving deep into one of the Bible's most powerful and transformative stories, the Book of Ruth. While it may seem like a simple narrative about loyalty and love, the lessons within these 4 chapters resonate deeply with us today. Ruth's journey is filled with unexpected twists, profound faith, and life-changing moments that can completely transform how we approach our own struggles and decisions. At the heart of this story is Ruth, a woman from a foreign land who makes an extraordinary choice to stay with her mother-in-law, Naomi, after the death of her husband. In the face of hardship, Ruth's commitment to Naomi is an act of pure love and devotion, one that sets in motion events far beyond what anyone could have imagined. This small act of faith changed her life and played a pivotal role in God's grand redemptive plan. But this story is so much more than just an act of loyalty. It's about the power of God's timing and His ability to transform hopeless situations. In a world where we often feel lost or uncertain, Ruth's journey reminds us that God's plan is always unfolding, even when we can't see it. Through Ruth's perseverance and unwavering trust in God, she discovers a future beyond her wildest dreams. Her story teaches us that no matter our background or past, God has a purpose for us that's greater than we could ever imagine. What can Ruth's story teach us today? As we tour this journey, we'll uncover how Ruth's faith in the face of adversity can inspire and challenge us in our own walk with God. Her decision to follow Naomi into an unknown future speaks directly to our own times of uncertainty, showing us how faith, even in the smallest steps, can lead to remarkable blessings. But we're not just retelling Ruth's story. We're pulling out powerful lessons that apply to each of us. How can we hold on to faith when everything around us seems to be falling apart? What can we learn from Ruth about making bold decisions when faced with fear or doubt? And most importantly, how can we trust that God is working in our lives, even when we don't see the full picture? By the end of this video, you'll understand why Ruth's story is not just a piece of ancient history. It's a timeless lesson for our world today. You will gain a deeper understanding of God's love, His faithfulness, and the ways He works behind the scenes in our lives. Ruth's journey is a reminder that no matter the challenges we face, God is always faithful to His promises and can bring about transformation in our lives, just as He did for Ruth. So, I invite you to join me on this journey. Let's explore how the story of Ruth can inspire you in your own faith and bring new hope to your life. Unpack how God used one woman's small act of faith to change the course of history, and how He's ready to do the same in your life today. Don't miss this powerful story and the incredible truths it holds for us all. In the opening of the Book of Ruth, we encounter a family struck by tragedy. Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons leave Bethlehem due to a famine, seeking refuge in Moab. But in Moab, the unthinkable happens. Elimelech dies. Later, both of Naomi's sons die as well. This leaves Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, in a deeply difficult situation, struggling with loss and uncertainty. This tragic event highlights the reality that life can often take unexpected and painful turns. We can all relate to the moments when things seem to fall apart, whether it's the loss of a loved one, the breakdown of relationships, or facing circumstances beyond our control. We see in Naomi's story that grief and pain are unavoidable parts of the human experience. Naomi's response is where the lesson begins. Despite the devastating losses, she chooses to return to Bethlehem. She has heard that God has visited His people with provision. The first lesson here is about choosing to move forward even in the face of immense hardship. In life, even when circumstances seem bleak, taking a step toward hope, however small, is sometimes all we can do, and it can make all the difference. Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem, and she urges her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab, telling them to go back to their own families. Orpah, after some hesitation, decides to leave, but Ruth refuses. She makes a bold declaration to Naomi, saying, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay." Ruth's loyalty and commitment to Naomi go beyond mere obligation. They reflect a deeper, selfless love. She chooses to walk alongside Naomi, even though it means stepping into the unknown, even though it means leaving her own people, customs, and her past behind. This is where Ruth's faith and courage shine through. Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi, despite the hardships, is a powerful example of loyalty, love, and faithfulness. As believers, this teaches us that faith isn't just about belief in God. It's about being faithful in our relationships, staying true to our commitments, and being willing to walk through life's challenges with others. Ruth's choice reminds us that sometimes faith calls us to make difficult, self-sacrificial decisions that will have lasting impact, not just on ourselves, but on the lives of others. Naomi, on the other hand, returns to Bethlehem broken and bitter. She tells the people of the town to call her Mara, meaning bitter, because she feels that the Lord has dealt with her harshly. Naomi's pain is real, and she doesn't hide it. Yet, even in her bitterness, she is moving toward something. Even in the depths of sorrow, Naomi is walking into the promise of restoration. This shows us that it's okay to feel pain and express grief, but it also challenges us to move forward toward healing and hope, even when we don't understand the full picture. By the end of this chapter, Naomi and Ruth arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is not just a coincidence. It is a signal that even when everything seems bleak, God's timing is always perfect. The harvest season represents a new beginning, a fresh opportunity that Naomi and Ruth cannot yet see, but is already in motion. What can we learn from this? Life doesn't always unfold the way we expect, and the pain of loss is a reality for everyone. But Naomi's return to Bethlehem and Ruth's unwavering commitment show us that in times of loss and sorrow, God offers us the opportunity to move forward, to trust in His provision, and to remain faithful in our relationships with others. Just like Naomi and Ruth, we can trust that even in our most difficult times, God's timing is perfect, and He is always working behind the scenes, preparing us for a new season of blessing. This story also teaches us the power of loyalty and faithfulness. Ruth's loyalty to Naomi wasn't just about sticking around during good times. It was about walking through the hard times with her, even when it meant facing uncertainty. As believers, we are called to live out that same faithfulness in our relationships, whether with family, friends, or our community. Naomi's story encourages us to keep moving forward, even when life feels unbearable. Sometimes the journey doesn't make sense, but by choosing to move forward, we make space for God to work in our lives. And like Naomi, we may not always see it, but God's provision and grace are always there, waiting for us to walk into them. In chapter 2, we step into the bustling fields of Bethlehem, where Ruth, a Moabite widow, embarks on a journey of survival and faith. It's more than just a day of gleaning for Ruth. It's a moment that will forever change the course of her life and the lives of those around her. Ruth, bound by loyalty to her mother-in-law Naomi, is determined to make her way in a foreign land. She doesn't know what lies ahead, but she steps forward in faith, trusting God's provision in the small, humble tasks set before her. Ruth's decision to glean in the fields is one of necessity and humility. Gleaning was a practice that allowed the poor, widows, and orphans to gather leftover grain from the harvesters. As Ruth works diligently, collecting the grains others have missed, she is not just gathering food, she is trusting God with the little she has, believing that somehow, some way, He will provide. Little does Ruth know that her faithfulness will lead her straight to a man named Boaz, whose actions will reflect the divine kindness and provision of God. Boaz, the owner of the field, is introduced as a man of standing, wealthy, influential, and deeply rooted in his faith. He notices Ruth almost immediately. There's something about her, a quiet determination, a deep loyalty to Naomi, that catches his attention. At first, Ruth may not recognize the significance of this meeting, but for Boaz, it is the beginning of something much greater. Boaz, moved by her faithfulness, goes beyond what is required of him. He sees Ruth's worth not as a foreign widow, but as a woman of great value. Boaz's kindness toward Ruth is immediate and generous. He doesn't just allow her to glean with the other workers. He commands them to leave extra grain behind for her, to intentionally provide for her. He ensures that Ruth is protected from any harm, offering her water and a place to rest during the heat of the day. Boaz treats Ruth as more than a stranger or outsider. He sees her through the lens of compassion and dignity. This act of kindness, though seemingly simple, is an embodiment of God's love, poured out through a human heart. Boaz is not just a landowner. He is a vessel through which God's provision flows. Ruth, overwhelmed by this kindness, bows before Boaz, unsure of how to respond. She doesn't know why he would show such favor to her, a foreigner. But Boaz reassures her, acknowledging her loyalty to Naomi and blessing her for her actions. This moment is a turning point, not just for Ruth, but for us. It teaches us that God's provision often comes in ways we don't expect, through people who, like Boaz, show kindness and generosity without expectation of anything in return. But the lessons don't end there. Ruth's story teaches us about trust, trusting God with the small, faithful steps and believing that he will provide for our needs, even when we cannot see the whole picture. Ruth didn't know that her simple act of obedience, leaning in the field, would lead her to a man who would change her life, but she trusted God to guide her one step at a time. Ruth's faithfulness, though seemingly unnoticed at the time, opened the door for God to work in powerful ways. Boaz's kindness also reminds us of the importance of generosity and compassion. It's easy to overlook the needs of others, especially when we are busy with our own lives. But Boaz's example shows us that the smallest acts of kindness can make a significant impact. He didn't have to go the extra mile for Ruth, but he did, because he saw her as someone worthy of care and respect. In the same way, we are called to show kindness and generosity to those around us, especially to those who are vulnerable or in need. As Ruth returns to Naomi with an abundance of grain, Naomi is stunned. She doesn't know the full story, but she begins to see the hand of God at work in their lives. She recognizes that Boaz is a close relative, a kinsman redeemer, and she realizes that God might be setting in motion the redemption of their family. Naomi's encouragement for Ruth to continue gleaning in Boaz's field reflects her growing hope. She begins to understand that God's provision has not only met their immediate needs, but is setting the stage for something even greater. Ruth's encounter with Boaz is not just a love story. It is a story of faith, trust, and divine provision. For Ruth, a woman who had lost so much, this moment is the beginning of restoration. For Boaz, it is an opportunity to show the love of God through acts of kindness. And for us, it is a reminder that God works in ways we often do not see, providing for our needs through unexpected people and situations. When we trust God in the small things, we position ourselves for his abundant provision. As we reflect on Ruth's experience, we are reminded of how often God's provision comes when we least expect it. Ruth was simply doing the hard work of gleaning, unaware that she was on the cusp of a divine encounter. How often do we find ourselves in similar seasons, working faithfully, without seeing immediate results, not knowing how things will unfold? Ruth's story encourages us to keep going, to keep trusting, even when the future feels uncertain. God's provision is always ahead of us, working behind the scenes to bring us exactly what we need, often in ways we couldn't have imagined. In conclusion to this chapter, let's remember that Ruth's time in Boaz's field is a picture of God's faithfulness to those who trust him, even in the smallest of steps. Just as Ruth trusted God with her future, we too are called to trust him with ours. Even in our vulnerability, God sees us. He knows our needs, and he will provide for us, sometimes through the kindness of others, sometimes through unexpected encounters. Let's take a lesson from Ruth and Boaz. Keep trusting, keep working, and keep believing that God is always at work, even when we don't see it. In Ruth 3 verses 1 to 18, we find ourselves once again in the fields of Bethlehem, but this time the story takes a significant turn. Ruth, having gleaned in the fields of Boaz for some time, finds herself standing at a crossroads. Naomi, her mother-in-law, sees the unfolding opportunities in a way Ruth cannot yet see. It's a moment of faith, action, and trust in God's divine plan, as Naomi urges Ruth to take a bold step toward her future. The chapter opens with Naomi offering Ruth advice rooted not just in tradition, but in a deep understanding of God's law and providence. Naomi knows that Boaz is a kinsman redeemer, a relative who has a right and responsibility to redeem a family member in need. This is a crucial moment in their story, where Boaz is willing to fulfill this role. It would mean security, protection, and a new beginning for Ruth and Naomi. Naomi's plan is simple but bold. Ruth must approach Boaz, present herself at his feet, and ask him to fulfill his role as her redeemer. At first glance, Naomi's instructions might seem strange. Why would Ruth go to Boaz in the middle of the night, after he has finished his work, and uncover his feet? But Naomi is not simply guiding Ruth in an act of desperation. She is leading her to a moment of faith and obedience. It's an act that requires vulnerability, trust, and boldness. Ruth has to put her future in the hands of Boaz, knowing that her well-being, as well as Naomi's, hangs in the balance. But even in her hesitation, Ruth trusts her mother-in-law and the wisdom that comes with her. Ruth, fully trusting Naomi's guidance, does as instructed. She waits until Boaz has had his meal, and the night grows quiet. Then she quietly approaches him, uncovers his feet, and lies down at his feet, waiting for him to wake and notice her. It's a vulnerable position, literally and figuratively. But Ruth's actions reveal her faith in both Naomi's plan and in God's providence. Ruth, in her simple obedience, places her future in Boaz's hands, trusting that God's will is unfolding through this act. When Boaz wakes up and finds Ruth at his feet, he is startled, but he doesn't respond with anger or rejection. Instead, Boaz is struck by Ruth's humility and her request. She asks him to spread his covering over her, symbolizing his role as her protector and redeemer. This is a powerful moment of trust and faith. Ruth is asking Boaz to fulfill his responsibility under God's law and to redeem her and Naomi's family. It's a request that speaks to God's provision, to the restoration of what was lost, and to the faithfulness that Ruth has shown. Boaz's response is full of grace and kindness. He commends Ruth for her integrity. She could have gone after a younger man, one who might have been more appealing to her, but instead, she has chosen the path of righteousness. He praises her for not seeking after a quick fix or an easy way out, but for trusting in God's plan and in his role as her redeemer. Boaz, moved by Ruth's request, promises to do what is right, but he also acknowledges that there is another relative who has the first right of redemption. Boaz is a man of integrity, and he will not act without ensuring that God's law is followed. He promises Ruth that if the other redeemer refuses, he will gladly fulfill the role himself. This conversation between Ruth and Boaz is a turning point. It is a moment of divine timing. Ruth's boldness and trust, combined with Boaz's integrity and willingness, have brought them to the edge of something new. God's hand is clearly at work in this moment, and both Ruth and Boaz recognize that their actions are not just about them. They are about the redemption of Naomi's family and the continuation of God's plan for Israel. Boaz's promise to Ruth sets the stage for the next step in their journey. He tells her to wait until morning, and then with great care and honor, he sends her home with an abundant gift of barley, more than enough to show Naomi that Boaz has not only heard Ruth's request, but is committed to doing what is right. Ruth returns to Naomi, and the two women wait together, trusting that God's will be done. This chapter, like the others, is a beautiful example of trust, faith, and divine timing. Ruth's obedience, even when the future is uncertain, shows us that sometimes we must take bold steps of faith. She didn't know what would happen when she went to Boaz's feet, but she trusted that God was leading her. Similarly, Naomi's wisdom reminds us of the importance of guidance. Sometimes we need someone to help us see what we cannot yet see. Naomi was not just giving advice. She was helping Ruth step into God's plan for her life. Boaz's character shines in this chapter, and his response to Ruth's request teaches us about integrity and generosity. He could have taken advantage of the situation, but instead, he chooses to act with honor and respect. Boaz's willingness to fulfill his responsibility as a kinsman redeemer is a powerful reminder that God's plan for our lives often includes people who are willing to step into our stories and make a difference. As we reflect on Ruth's story, we are reminded of the importance of trusting God with our futures. Just as Ruth trusted Naomi and Boaz, we too are called to trust God's timing and provision. Sometimes we must take bold steps of faith, even when we don't know how things will unfold. But if we remain faithful, God will lead us to the place He has prepared for us. Ruth's journey with Boaz teaches us that divine timing and trust in God's plan always lead to his provision. So, as we look at this chapter, let's ask ourselves, are we willing to take the bold steps of faith that God calls us to? Are we trusting him with our future, even when we don't know what lies ahead? Just as Ruth placed her future in Boaz's hands, we are invited to place our future in the hands of our Redeemer, knowing that he will always lead us where we need to go. In this pivotal chapter, the story of Ruth and Boaz reaches its climactic and redemptive moment. Ruth's faithfulness, Boaz's generosity, and God's providence all converge to bring about a new beginning for both Ruth and Naomi, highlighting how obedience and trust in God's timing can lead to extraordinary outcomes. The chapter opens with Boaz taking action. Having recognized the depth of Ruth's character, he now seeks to secure her future by addressing a legal matter. This is not a mere formality. It's a step toward fulfilling the responsibility of the kinsman redeemer, a practice rooted in the law of Israel designed to protect widows and preserve family inheritance. Boaz knows that there's another relative closer than he is, who has the first right to redeem Ruth. However, Boaz is not deterred. He approaches this relative with wisdom and transparency, understanding that the outcome is ultimately in God's hands. This is a key moment in the narrative, where we see the intersection of human responsibility and divine intervention. Boaz's willingness to act as a kinsman redeemer, even when it's not immediately advantageous to him, underscores the value of sacrificial love and the integrity of doing what is right, even when it's difficult. As Boaz brings the matter before the town elders, we see the power of community in the unfolding of God's plan. Boaz calls together the elders at the city gate, a place where legal transactions were publicly conducted. The elders, witnesses to the unfolding drama, agree to the terms laid out by Boaz, affirming his noble intentions. Their decision not only affirms the integrity of the process, but also highlights the importance of community in holding one another accountable and supporting one another in times of need. When the closer relative hesitates, Boaz steps forward to offer himself as the redeemer. He doesn't just buy Ruth's land. He takes her in as his wife, thereby ensuring that the legacy of Elimelech and his family is preserved. This moment is not only a legal transaction, it is a profound act of grace. Boaz is not simply fulfilling a duty. He is taking on a responsibility that will cost him, but in doing so, he becomes a tangible representation of God's love and provision. The moment Boaz agrees to redeem Ruth is filled with joy and celebration. The elders, witnessing the act of redemption, bless Boaz and Ruth. Their blessings echo with anticipation of the new life that is about to be born, a son who will carry on the family name and restore hope to Naomi. The blessings uttered by the elders emphasize not just the legal significance of the redemption, but the spiritual weight of what has transpired. Ruth, the Moabite widow, is now welcomed into the family of Israel, and through Boaz, he finds not just a husband, but a future filled with hope. In the midst of this celebration, Naomi, who had once been bitter and filled with sorrow, finds joy and fulfillment. Her heart, which had once been empty and broken, is now full. She holds the baby, Obed, and the women of the community recognize that Naomi has been redeemed as well. This child, born out of a union that seemed improbable, is a symbol of restoration and renewal, not just for Ruth and Naomi, but for all of Israel. The closing verses of the chapter bring everything full circle, revealing God's hand in the unfolding of events. Ruth and Boaz's story is not just a personal story of love and redemption. It is part of a larger divine narrative that ultimately leads to the birth of King David, an ancestor of Jesus Christ. In this way, the chapter reminds us that God is always working behind the scenes, weaving our individual stories into his greater plan of salvation. As we reflect on the events of chapter 4, we are reminded of several powerful truths. First, God's timing is always perfect. What may seem like a series of chance encounters is, in fact, God orchestrating the steps of his people to bring about his purposes. Boaz's willingness to redeem Ruth at the right moment, despite the challenges, serves as a reminder that God's provision often comes at the moment of greatest need. Second, this chapter emphasizes the beauty of sacrificial love. Boaz's commitment to redeeming Ruth even when it was not required of him. Teaches us the value of acting out of love, generosity, and integrity. His actions reflect Christ's ultimate act of redemption, the cross, where he willingly took on the cost of our salvation. Lastly, we see the importance of community and the role it plays in God's redemptive plan. The elders, the women, and the people of Bethlehem all bear witness to God's work in Ruth's life. Their support and encouragement are part of the reason why Ruth and Naomi's story ends in joy and restoration. Similarly, we are called to be part of a community of believers who support and encourage one another in times of hardship and celebration. Ruth's journey from widowhood to redemption is a testament to the power of faith, obedience, and God's unmerited favor. As you reflect on this chapter, consider how God might be leading you to trust Him more deeply. Are you in a season of waiting for redemption, like Ruth? Trust that God sees your faithfulness and will provide for you in His perfect timing. And, like Boaz, look for ways to extend grace and kindness to others, offering them the same hope and restoration you've received. As we draw to a close, we invite you to reflect on your own journey and role in the unfolding narrative of redemption. Just as Ruth's story reveals God's provision in unexpected ways, so too does your life hold moments where God's timing and grace are at work. How can you, like Ruth, faithfully trust in God during seasons of waiting and uncertainty? Are there individuals around you who may need encouragement to see God's provision in their lives? Consider reaching out, just as Boaz extended grace to Ruth, offering kindness and support to those who may be in need of restoration. Your actions can be a tangible reflection of God's love in the world. As we reflect on the lessons Ruth teaches us, faith, loyalty, sacrificial love, and the importance of community, let us also invite you to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you will gain access to more insights into biblical narratives, the timeless lessons they hold, the encouragement to apply these principles to your own walk with God. Our commitment is to provide content that not only inspires, but equips you to live out the truths of God's Word with courage and hope. In summary, the key themes explored in Ruth's story are the powerful impact of faithfulness, God's providence through divine timing, and the transformative nature of love and redemption. As we continue on this journey together, let us remain open to the ways God is working in our lives, sometimes in quiet moments, sometimes in profound encounters. May we, like Ruth, trust in God's faithfulness and be ready to extend kindness and grace to those around us. Thank you for joining us as we explore the rich truths found in the Book of Ruth, and we look forward to growing together in understanding, faith, and action.